Did you know that John Belushi, the unforgettable comedic whirlwind who once turned late-night television on its head, almost abandoned show business to open a bar back in Chicago? This surprising fork in the road remains little known, yet it vividly underscores the unresolved internal tug-of-war that shadowed Belushi from the earliest days of his skyrocketing fame. This was the man who enthralled millions through Saturday Night Live in the 1970s, leaving audiences breathless with his over-the-top physical humor, rebellious spirit, and the uncanny ability to make mayhem feel oddly comforting. But behind that rousing laughter was a far more fragile reality, one defined by profound self-doubt, a gnawing longing for genuine fulfillment, and an escalating private desperation. To grasp the shape of John Belushi's world, we must look at the broader cultural terrain he emerged from. The middle of the 20th century was a time of extraordinary upheaval and reinvention. In the aftermath of World War II and well into the 1950s, many Americans still clung to domestic stability as the measure of success, with home ownership, secure jobs, and tight-knit families defining traditional happiness. But the 1960s ushered in civil rights protests, the counterculture explosion, and a youth rebellion that shattered old norms. Television developed rapidly in this time, leaping from black and white family sitcoms to bold comedic programs that challenged the status quo. By the early 1970s, the variety show format was fading, and late-night platforms were evolving into riskier territory. Comedians capitalized on a new freedom to ridicule political, social, and cultural taboos. It was a heady, rebellious atmosphere that rewarded boundary-pushing humor and raw personal expression. For John Belushi, who came of age precisely as this comedic revolution was hitting its stride, it offered an ideal launching pad. His comedic style, a raucous blend of physical slapstick, social irreverence, and unpredictable leaps of logic, fit perfectly into an entertainment world hungry for the next wave of edgy performers. Belushi's own upbringing combined the grit of an immigrant household with the fierce independence typical of mid-century Midwest America. Born January 24, 1949 in Chicago, he was the first son of Adam and Agnes Belushi. His father, an Albanian immigrant, worked ceaselessly in the restaurant trade, aiming to secure a stable future for his children. John's childhood revolved around the swirl of conversation in the family diner, where he observed both the warmth and the frustrations of everyday working people. From a young age, he exuded an extroverted magnetism, craving laughter like sustenance. Those who knew him as a child recalled how he mimicked local characters, teachers, neighbors, and even the local priest, folding their mannerisms and catchphrases into spontaneous comedic sketches. He also had a restless streak, an inability to sit quietly in the back of the room, which often led to discipline at school. Yet within that mischief lay a sincere desire to connect with and entertain the people around him. Early glimpses of his comedic brilliance mingled with misgivings about his place in the world. Was he destined to follow in his father's footsteps in the diner, or could he harness this comedic spark on a larger stage? Throughout his teenage years, Belushi balanced a devotion to high school football, where he channeled his formidable energies on the field, with late-night jam sessions of comedic improvisation in friends' basements. He would spin anecdotes about teachers, impersonate sports coaches, or riff on local events, discovering that no matter how imposing a figure might be in real life, comedy could cut them down to size. He was also navigating the typical anxieties of adolescence, yet found that making people laugh provided a reliable refuge from self-doubt. After high school, he drifted briefly from one college to another, never quite settling into an academic path. Everything changed when he ventured into Chicago's thriving improvisational scene. eventually crossing paths with the Second City, a groundbreaking comedy troupe that had already minted a new brand of comedic talent, combining spontaneity with razor-sharp social commentary. When Belushi auditioned for the Second City, his raw energy impressed longtime performers. He might not have had the technical polish of seasoned improv veterans, but nobody could miss the bounding force of nature he unleashed on stage. Within the Second City's creative hothouse, Belushi honed a new comedic language, one defined by abrupt shifts in emotion and full-bodied physical risk-taking. He'd fling himself across the stage, contort his face in bizarre ways, or deliver a line so unexpected it could derail the entire scene, yet somehow land the biggest laughs. Even then, he exuded a restlessness that went beyond comedic ambition. He toyed with ideas for restaurants or clubs back in Chicago, believing that the diner life was still a fallback if show business soured. That mixture of unstoppable performance mania and constant second-guessing became his trademark. By 1972, National Lampoon took notice. Belushi joined the ensemble for the National Lampoon Radio Hour and stage shows, collaborating with soon-to-be luminaries like Gilda Radner and Chevy Chase. Fueling these comedic endeavors was a collaborative environment that valued risk-taking above all else, but it was also a culture that glamorized after-hours parties. This included the ready availability of drugs, which Belushi occasionally turned to for stamina or a quick high. Back then, few recognized how such habits could spiral into dependency. By 1975, Belushi was primed for the big leagues. Producer Lorne Michaels was creating an unconventional late-night variety series, Saturday Night Live, designed to capture the zeitgeist of a jaded generation. Belushi joined what would become one of the most famous comedic casts in television history, alongside Gilda Radner, Dan Aykroyd, Chevy Chase, Lorraine Newman, and Jane Curtin. At a time when political satire and social critique were on the rise, SNL married irreverence with intellectual edge. Belushi's flamboyant unpredictability, his ferocious leaps, guttural yells, and comedic chaos electrified audiences. His comedic characters range from a flailing samurai to a gluttonous bee to the unforgettable role of Jake Blues. Overnight, he became a national talking point. Even those who disliked SNL's irreverent humor found themselves marveling at Belushi's capacity to fill the screen with pure comedic force. Yet success on SNL had a precarious flip side. The show's breakneck production schedule, the edgy atmosphere, and the constant after-parties, fueled by cocaine, took a toll. Belushi, who had always found validation in crowd approval, discovered he could keep up the nonstop pace with chemical assistance. Initially, it felt like an advantage, but it soon morphed into a cycle of highs and crashes, frayed nerves, and mental strain. Colleagues glimpsed how he could be convivial one minute, spinning comedic gold in writing sessions, and then vanish for hours, returning in a jittery haze. That tightrope walk between comedic brilliance and personal meltdown was never more evident than during SNL's second season, when Belushi's intense partying began to erode his reliability. There were nights when he would miss rehearsals or show up late, yet the final broadcast, more often than not, showcased him at his outrageous best, overshadowing concerns about what was happening off camera. Film producers couldn't wait to harness that comedic power. In 1978, John Landis directed Belushi in National Lampoon's Animal House. Belushi played John Bluto Blutarsky, a role that turned him into an overnight cultural phenomenon. Though his character spoke relatively few lines, his physical gags, whether gyrating eyebrows or manic food fights, cemented his comedic stardom. The movie's unprecedented box office success left Hollywood executives convinced that Belushi was the next unstoppable comedic star. Backstage, Belushi wrestled with ambivalent feelings about being typecast. He relished the public's adoration, but feared he was pigeonholed as the overgrown frat boy archetype. He also worried that if he couldn't replicate that comedic formula, he'd be discarded by the very system that now adored him. That tension exacerbated his drug use, which offered a temporary salve for deeper anxieties. One lesser-known event that significantly shaped Belushi's self-perception occurred during the filming of 1941-1979, Steven Spielberg's ambitious World War II comedy. Belushi played a wild, reckless pilot, a role seemingly tailor-made for his brand of comedic mania. But the production was chaotic, the script uncertain in tone, and Belushi felt overshadowed by Spielberg's big-budget approach. He perceived a disconnect between the comedic spontaneity that had catapulted him to fame and a meticulous directorial style that demanded discipline. Though 1941 eventually recouped some of its budget, it didn't become the smash hit many predicted. Belushi blamed himself, privately lamenting to friends that he might be just a one-note phenomenon. This frustration led him to push even harder for comedic extremes in subsequent roles, an impulse that made him increasingly dependent on stimulants to maintain the intensity. When Belushi and Dan Aykroyd expanded their SNL characters, Jake and Elwood Blues, into the film The Blues Brothers, 1980, it was equal parts comedic romp and musical tribute. The shoot was notoriously raucous, with Belushi's drug use ballooning. Assistants told stories of him vanishing from set, only to be found asleep in random locations after benders. Yet the movie itself soared, blending comedic hijinks with genuine R&B performance. Belushi's trademark enthusiasm and a surprising vocal ability made the film an unlikely success. Once again, he had proven that his comedic mania, underpinned by real talent, could attract huge audiences. But behind the scenes, friends like Aykroyd worried about Belushi's deteriorating health and mental state. He would show moments of clarity, joking that he should open a bar in Chicago and leave Hollywood altogether. Yet each time, he was lured back by big offers and that irresistible applause. Even as he soared, Belushi yearned to break from the limiting comedic stereotypes. He attempted a quieter, more mature performance in Continental Divide, 1981, playing a city journalist transplanted to the Rockies. The film earned modest reviews but did not match his earlier hits, fueling Belushi's doubts about whether audiences would ever accept him in a role that wasn't raucously unhinged. The personal toll of these career fluctuations, coupled with unrelenting work schedules and growing drug reliance, led him to a precarious emotional place by the early 1980s. Toward the end, a heavy sense of disillusionment and fatigue defined Belushi's private life. In the months leading up to March 1982, he became increasingly erratic. Associates described wild mood swings. One day, he'd exude unstoppable optimism about a new script. The next, he'd brood about being misunderstood by Hollywood. He often retreated to the Chateau Marmont in Los Angeles, a storied hotel that had become his refuge, shielded from prying eyes. Paradoxically, it also was a place enabling his worst tendencies. Staff members recalled him pacing halls late at night, hosting impromptu parties that mixed creative discussion with unbridled substance abuse. His wife, Judith, pleaded with him to scale back, urging him to return to Chicago for a more grounded existence. But Belushi, locked in a cycle of mania and self-doubt, found it impossible to pull away from the immediate thrill of stardom. On March 4th, 1982, he spent the evening indulging at various LA clubs, accompanied by acquaintances who marveled at his still potent comedic magnetism, even though signs of exhaustion were obvious. Early the next morning, inside his bungalow at the Chateau Marmont, he injected a speedball, a potent mix of heroin and cocaine. Though friends around him had witnessed his reckless consumption countless times, no one acted swiftly enough. At some point in the small hours, his body simply failed. By the time staff discovered him, Belushi was unresponsive, likely having experienced acute heart failure triggered by the drugs. Ambulances rushed to the hotel, but the comedic phenomenon that had defined a generation was already gone. News of his death at 33 shocked fans who had adored his comedic chaos on SNL and in film. It also devastated his close-knit circle. Dan Aykroyd, heartbroken, called it a needless, senseless loss. Producer Lorne Michaels lamented the unspeakable waste of such talent. Within days, newspapers worldwide splashed lurid headlines about Hollywood's drug culture, and the woman who administered the fatal shot eventually became the subject of a criminal investigation. This, in turn, ignited heated discussions about whether Belushi himself, or the environment that enabled him, bore the greatest blame. Some viewers, blindsided by the comedic star's downfall, painted him as just another cautionary example of celebrity drug excess, while others insisted the system that demanded superhuman comedic feats was complicit. In closing, Belushi's story invites a pause to honor the fullness of his life, both the comedic heights that shaped an era and the heartbreaking vulnerabilities that remain instructive for generations to come. His comedic achievements remain an exuberant testament to the power of performance, to the transformative magic that emerges when fearlessness and inventiveness collide on stage or screen. Yet his death is an equally potent reminder that the line between creative genius and tragedy can be perilously thin, especially in a culture that prizes spectacle over well-being. Therein lies the deeper lesson of John Belushi's life. Brilliance untempered by self-care can slip from triumph into catastrophe with harrowing speed. That's all for today's video. Don't forget to leave a like, comment your thoughts, and subscribe so you'll always be in the loop. Thanks for watching.